Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Dro and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk with you about mutable values as default values of functions when using in Python. As you know, there are objects that are mutable and objects that are immutable. In the case where you use as a default value a mutable object, you may run into some unexpected behaviors. Well, I know it's a very common and known pitfall or danger zone of Python. Nevertheless, I think it makes sense to talk about it once again. I will try to demonstrate when it's problematic, how to mitigate the problem, and I will try to mimic this also with immutable values and see how the problem doesn't occur when you're dealing with immutable values, although you may say it doesn't make much sense to try out what I'm going to show you. In the code, we start with a very general typing, importing, and then we get to the business. We define a function, add value, and it's going to get a list as an input and a value, and it's just going to append this value to the given list. And as you see here, we're going to give it a default value, the empty list. Otherwise, this function doesn't do much, right? It's just printing the input. It prints the object ID of the my list, the given list, and it's appending to that and returning the list. So very simple and straightforward. And the problem is that actually now when I evaluated this function, then Python created an empty list, an object of type list, and it's empty, and it won't do it again. It's gonna stay the same object for the whole life of the interpreter in this case. And let's see what it means. So first of all, if we try just to provide something here, so another list, so we initialize the new object with a list that contains foo, then things work as follows, right? We get as an input foo, we get an ID, it's the ID of the object that's created implicitly here, and we append to it the foo bar. So far so good, we just see that it works. Now we're gonna use the default value, and it still looks fine. So we have an empty list, right? Because this is the empty list as the default value of the function add value. We see the ID of this. We will see in a second how it helps us to understand what's going on here. And we get the result. It's the list that contains the value foo. Now we're doing it again. Exactly the same call here as we had here without specifying the list. So we assume or we hope that I will use the empty list that's provided as the default value for the function. However, if we execute this cell, then we see that the result here is twice foo. And why is that happening? This gives us the first hint that the input value, my list, already contains foo, so it's no wonder that we append to it another foo. We have twice the same value. And the other hint here, and that's actually proving what I said before, that this default value is generated once and only once, you see that it's exactly the same ID of the list. So the default value is created once, it has an ID, and any changes that you make to it will impact all later calls of the same function if they use the default value. So that's the problem. That's the thing you have to be careful about. How to mitigate this? Very easy. You go and just add the none as another option here, and you check if nothing is provided, then you initialized my list to be the empty list. And this will happen anew in every call to the function add value when my list is not provided, because it will receive the none object and then it will populate it with the empty list, or the parameter of the function my list will be populated with a new instance of an empty list. let's evaluate this function and do the same as we did before. So we call the function with the empty list implicitly as the default value, and we want to append to it the value foo, and we get an empty list as the value. That's what's printed here, right? And the final result is the list with the value foo. It has an ID, and let's compare it to the second run here, and it works now as expected, right? The final result is a list with a single value foo. The starting point is an empty list, and you see that we have two different IDs of the empty list because it's created twice here. That's the way to mitigate it. Lastly, I want to show you what happens if we try to use something immutable as the default value. And to that end, I wrote this function here, and I have here a tuple, and again, I print it, I print the ID. Now, I can't do something like this, right? Because a tuple is immutable, so it doesn't have an append function. So what I need to do is some hack like so. And this is also where the kind of different behavior and solution, if you try to use some immutable values, happens, because this is an assignment. You create a new value, a new object, my tuple, and you assign to it the old value of my tuple plus the new value. So if we let this run and we check once here, we get my tuple here is an empty tuple. And note that this ID here is the one of the empty tuple that's instantiated, that's created when the function was defined. But then immediately here, it's a different object. It has a different ID. So if we run this again here, you see that this ID is the same because it refers to this default value of the tuple, right? But the actual value that we return eventually is different. It's a different object. So the final result in both cases is a tuple with a single value foo. So that concludes the demo here that I wanted to show you. We learned about the problem here, what happens if you use mutable values as the default values of a function in Python. We saw how to solve this. We also experimented a little bit with the options of immutable default values, and I hope you found it helpful. If so, don't forget to subscribe and click the like button, and I hope to see you soon in the next videos. In the meantime, I'm Dr. Dro, and happy coding.